let's talk about product photography and how that actually can just improve the storytelling of your project and like help with the documentation process so much. So let's start with some memes. This is going to be you guys when you're making the documentation file. Like, what is the designer actually doing? What's the product? The pouch is the product, but the bananas next to it so that you can give some context based on like how big is the product. So sometimes designers do that, like they place their projects right next to something with like a similar size just to show like how big it is. Then, do we need calipers? Yes, we need calipers. Sometimes it's good to show like the dimensions whenever you make your project, and even if you put it there, like maybe if you measure it and like with like a line, just like show that this is like 10 centimeters long. So if you don't want to give like context in terms of like relative objects like the size, it's good to like just show like how big it is, like showing the dimensions. So, how do we document and storytell, like to build a good narrative? Um, we can talk about the kind of images we want to include, like whenever you're showing your project as industrial designers or like as UX designers, what are the images that we include whenever making a presentation or just like the documentation file? So the four types of images that we include is the hero shot, the function images, the process and the creation, and the money shot. And we can talk about in detail what each of these mean. So the first one is the hero shot. And what is the hero shot? The hero shot is like basically an advertisement that you see. So if you're going down the street and you see like a Coca-Cola advertisement with like this really dynamic composition. It's about the composition and the emotion. So when you see that poster, you know like that advertisement is about this product, this can of Coca-Cola. So it's about that. So whenever we make a hero shot of our product, it's about how are you displaying it? What's the composition? You make it extra dramatic and exciting and like edgy and cool. You can decide the vibe if it's more emotional, if it's more dramatic, if it's like more fun. But it's about that impression you're creating with the first image. So that is always the first image. Before you get into detail of your process, the first like starting image is the hero shot. It's like the X factor that you look at that image and you're like, oh my God, I want this product. This is so cool. Then it's about the function images. What exactly are function images? Well, they explain the benefits and the features of the design. So it can be like an exploded view of the product. So you're showing down like what the features are, or like just like zoomed in on like one of the features. So it's like more diagrammatic, exploded view, or like cutaway to just like that there's this on and off button, or like when you explode it, you're showing the layers that if it's like an earphone, you're showing like the different layers that are there, like in the design. So it's just about explaining the function and how the product was built, because users want to understand how the product was made, not just the company, but when like as a consumer, we buy a product, we want to see how it works. Like people are inquisitive about like what's in the product. So it's always good to show like the function and like break down the features, or like just make it more interesting and like give them more context on how it was made. So from hero shot, we go to function images. Then after the function images, because it's documentation, it's really important to show the process and creation. And process and creation doesn't mean like you have to maybe show your hands like everywhere. It's just about how the product or the idea evolved. So it's about showing your sketches, like your initial idea, to your sketch models, like your first lo-fi prototype, to going to the test mock-up, maybe your user testing it, like if you had pictures of the user using your product, to the final product, like how did you get to this point? Like people want to see that it's validated, like there was reason behind this design that you're showing us. And you communicate it through like interesting ways, like storyboarding, or just like a time lapse. People make like cool videos, but you can do like storyboarding of like how the product is supposed to be used, and maybe just like make a mood board with like how it started to like what it is right now. Telling the story. how can visuals, photos, and renders tell the story of the product and the user? I know we didn't talk about vendors, but like product photography also, just it doesn't matter if it's not like a product that you can go buy off the shelf. Like we've seen all of your projects and they're so beautiful. Like, it's just about how you can take pictures and make it more interesting in terms of the story that you're telling us during your final presentation when you record your video. So we can talk about how we can make the story more interesting with just those pictures. The last one, when we're ending it, it's the money shot. We started with this emotional, dramatic, just like really extra dramatic, edgy thing. And then we actually want to talk about what the product is. We showed the functions, we showed the story, we showed the process, but now we want to talk about what's the context. So if it's a wheelchair you designed, we want to see someone sitting on it. Like the last picture is about someone using the product. It's about it being in context. It's if it's like a kitchen appliance, I don't want to see it against like just a white background. Maybe the kitchen appliance is kept in the kitchen and you take a picture with that on the table, like the kitchen table. So it's about giving product the context. So the people who are looking at your portfolio can understand, okay, like I can see this here. So you're helping them visualize your product in that particular scenario. So again, show the environment and usage. It should be easy to like read and understand, like what is the story, what is the context. So if you're designing a chair that's supposed to be for the dinner table, maybe your hero shot was just like a random really interesting composition of the chair, but then the money shot should be with the dining table so that I know that, oh, this was built for the dining table. So it's just about giving context to your product. We can talk about this project is just from one of my friends, to give you guys an example of how we do documentation or like just show the process to where you got. So Miko
Sejal,
Hmm?
Can we ask questions as you go along?
Yeah.
Can I just ask for a couple clarifications on what I am sure are common ID terms that maybe some of the rest of us don't know?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I should have.
But what is a mood board?
So a mood board is basically how you design a product. So sometimes it can be about the form. So if you want to make a product that has more like circular soft forms, then you make a mood board. Like mood board is just like a board, a whiteboard. You can make it like physically or digitally, and you just print pictures that have similar forms that you want to take inspiration from. A mood board can be based on textures and materials, so if it's like texture and materials, or a mood board can be of existing products. So if you're making, for example, like a wheelchair, you research on all the wheelchairs that exist, and the wheelchairs you want to take inspiration from, you collect them and like put that on a mood board. If you want to include inspiration from some existing other types of chairs, you include that on the mood board. So mood board is just like before you even start ideating and sketching, it's just like, where am I getting inspiration from? If it's about creating a product that's inspired from nature, maybe you create a mood board with like the product pictures of like other existing products, and then you include like nature stuff that you want to include. So you maybe include like some form of a tree that really inspired, like the shape really inspired you, so you put that on the mood board. So it's just like before you even start sketching, where did you get the idea to like sketch this form? So it's about like just researching before you even start sketching.
So in this context, it sounds like something that maybe students can put on Mural.
Yes, I actually have an example of a similar, not mood board exactly, but kind of a mood board on Pinterest. People can just pin stuff and like create like a board. So we like it's towards the end, so we can show one of the examples.
One other term clarification I have. What does edgy mean in this context?
Edgy is just like cool or interesting, if you look at any of the advertisements, they're so extra. It's just not needed. It's so dramatic, but it's fun and interesting to look at. So it's like, although it's dramatic, it's not like it's not too much. So it's fun to look at. So sometimes people do that with their hero shot
Mhm.
where it doesn't have context, but it's so dramatic and emotional that it's almost fun to look at it. And you're curious to see like, oh, what is this about? Because it looks so interesting. Like the composition and like the render or like the picture looks so interesting.
Okay.
So I was thinking to add to that, like, if you're trying, like, for hero shots, let's say when Sejal brought up like a Coca-Cola ad or something like that, things that make a hero shot dramatic are like the lighting and kind of like the drama of like the different views that you take a picture in. It's just all about like how you add and take away features or just like honestly, a lot of it depends on like the lighting of it, of like whether you're backlighting something versus like lighting it with like multiple lights to show everything, you know. So we'll progress through and have examples.
Thank you.
So like this is an example again of a hero shot. And as a user, since the platform's lower, if we were looking at this product, it would be from a top view. But to make it more interesting, she placed it exactly parallel to the user, and on a lower level. So it makes the composition slightly more interesting because the background's also blue, the product's also blue. So it's almost like an advertisement. I don't know what the product is yet. If it didn't say here, I would not know what this product is about. But this is an example of a hero shot. This is a render, but we can create the same effect with pictures that we take. Then she gives a little bit context about like, what is she designing? What is she designing for? What's the purpose? So in your case, it's going to be talking about your user. You know, like if the first picture that I'm seeing is example of shower chair. So then talking about your user and just like user needs would be a very interesting way to like build the story of like, what am I looking at? Okay, I looked at a shower chair. Now I'm understanding what this project's about. Again, then based on what your user needs were, you talk about what are the possibilities, like what are some like things you're trying to solve, like what are some things you want to focus on with your project, like what was the purpose of your project, like just talking about the objective. Then you show somewhat the sketching even in your final process, like even when you're presenting like the final presentation. It's always good to show some process, like your process book and your documentation is separate. But when you're making a final presentation also, it's really good to give context to like how you got to this point. So just like making a clean, neat, like just like a visual of your sketching process, maybe combined with like the mock-ups that you did, the lo-fi prototype that you did. And then you get to the function images where you're breaking down the features, like what does what part do? So the speaker on top has like a visual display. So she mentioned that this is a display, that it's a smart assistant speaker, that there's a phone dock, that there's a mic that can be kept on the speaker. So just like breaking down the features, maybe you can, you know, you have an interesting composition. And if you have a picture like let's say of the shower chair, so when you added something, you can just point it out, like make an arrow and like point it out. This is for armrest. This is for back support. This is like soft. So you're giving, you know, people more context about what exactly they do. Because if you design a product, you know what it's supposed to do. But as someone else who's looking at your project, unless you share it with me, unless you're talking about it, I would not understand. So it's always good to give like visual representation with like, you know, just like writing down small words. Like I don't want to see like long sentences, but just like small words, like what each part is. And it's always interesting, like if you want to make like an orthographic drawing of your project, that also makes it like more interesting to look at, just like in terms of composition, in terms of just like breakdown, because the user can see what the size is and like how it looks from different angles. So if you have like a perspective picture that's like three-dimensional, but then you're giving like a 2D drawing also right next to it, makes the composition very interesting. So that's also something you can include like in function images. Or you can have like just like exploded views and just like zoomed in pictures of like each function. Like there's a charging input or there's like a detachable clip on like the mic. So just like again breaking down the features and like zooming into things that like add meaning to your product or like is different about your product. So making the user understand what all your product can do is always really helpful. Like it's always good to show that in your process or like when you're like in your final presentation. Again, more breakdowns, more like just like context. What does this part do? Like giving users all the feature breakdown, making it more interesting. Like if you look at all these images, the composition's so interesting. Like, she could place it horizontally, like parallel, but then she gave it like this interesting composition, like put it in like a slanting way. So it's just something that you usually don't see. Like the lighting here is so dramatic. Like there was only one overlight like light that gives it such a strong dark shadow. And even though the shadow wasn't here, if you actually zoom into it, you'll see that she drew it on Illustrator. Like on Adobe Illustrator, she drew out the shadow. It didn't actually exist on the render or the photo. So even if your picture that you took isn't as interesting, you can always do like interesting stuff like after drawing on it. Like she drew or like put this clip art of like an iPhone to give more context. That she mentioned that it was a phone doc, so she wanted to give more context and she placed like a clip art of an iPhone. One other interesting thing that actually every designer wants you to do is storyboard. If you don't have in context like pictures of your user using the lo-fi, storyboard and tell us how your product is used. So here she broke it down, like you tap on the screen, it turns on, the mic gets activated, then you turn it, like it shows the entire process. So I know how to use this product now. It's not like a step-by-step guide, but it's just like storyboarding, like telling me a narrative. Like when it sounds extra, but everyone would say that each product has a story. Each product is about an experience. So it's not just like if there's a cup, it's not just a cup, it has meaning. Like you would, maybe give context to someone filling the water in the cup and then someone drinking it, and now that product has a story. So each product has a story, and you as the designer here needs to tell us that story. You need to tell us that story with your user. Like how is this product being used by your user? It just adds more value. Like Chrissy did the other day without even showing us a picture of her co-designer. She narrated the story with her storyboarding in such an interesting way that we didn't have to, we didn't have a question about who this person was, because she visualized, like with her storyboarding, she helped us visualize what the product was. And the last one is the money shot. So giving us context. Where does the product exist? Like, where is it going to be used? What's the purpose of this product? Not just dramatic, but in context. So this is an office setting. Her project was designed to be used in an office setting with like microphone, and so that like it's loud enough. And she tried to do that by like just like placing the project in like the middle of the conference room. So just like think about whenever you're trying to make your final presentation, think about what place do you want to show for your in context picture. Well, like she said, possibilities are many. So is for you guys. However you want to show your story, there's so many interesting ways that you can show your stories and your project. And like if you guys have any questions about like how you can personally make your project more interesting, like Lauren and I are here, so you can just ask us, like show us pictures of your documentation process and like your hero shot, and we can tell you how you can make it more interesting.
So diving into like what makes a photo stronger, you can go like it all depends on how you're taking a picture. Like there were a handful of photos that we've seen, like products of that you guys are making, and you have a picture of what you made, but you also have, you know, like shoes in the background, or just like things that are, you know, hanging around in your home, which is totally normal. But like if you take that object that you've designed and put it with a simpler background, that way the viewer can view it in a way that their main focus is your product. And we'll go through the next few slides to kind of show you what co-designer projects exist through BWSI and like how we might improve them. So I'm going to exit full screen here and then hop to the next page. Okay. Okay, so we'll go and start here. Okay, perfect. So this is the garden cart from last year. So if you go through the process, you can see that the sketches, like you can see that there's color added. It's just like you can understand where it's coming from beginning and then to development to see what changes. And what they do really well here is you're showing the product and then you're showing the person using it. I think a way to improve this could be isolating the person. So let's say you have your product and your co-designer. How can you take the background and make it black and white, or do something so that the main focus is on the person? So as you progress, there are types of ways that you can like improve your pictures. So these are really good pictures, but the way to take them to the next level is like literally just focusing on geometry. So from like, if you're facing someone and then you're taking a picture straight on, like that's a great picture to have, you know, just like moving your body just a little, just to take a picture, like a meaningful front view, side view, 3/4 view. And then something like this where you have, here's my first prototype and it's existing in the space that it needs to be in, like the garden. That's a great photo. I would say if you wanted to make it more impactful, like think how you can play around with shadows, or like focus mainly on, you know how like on iPhones they have like the portrait mode, like how can you isolate your product that's in there and then show kind of like a little bit of a blurred background. Same with these process pictures. They show they're valuable, but like how can we put them next to each other so that they communicate with each other, so we can understand exactly what's going on, maybe even adding call outs, or thinking about like when we take these pictures, how can you have it just be all concrete versus the different things that are in the background.
Adding on to that, I was just wondering, like, you added a sketch right next to it, and then these pictures were like on the side all together. I would know like this is how the combined product's supposed to look like, and then this is how I got to it. So just like maybe like even on top, if you add it like callouts, I guess that would make it just more helpful for the user to understand. Like these are great process pictures, but like a way to make it better would be just like adding callouts or like placing them all together.
Right. And then we'll hop on to the next project, which is the foot lift. And so as we progress through this, like these are valuable pictures, but like how can we show what this actually is, right? So you want like a top view, a side view, a 3/4 view, and think about what you're photographing it on. Do you think that carpet could be like, does that compete with what's showing here? And then like, how can you make the background consistent in all of these pictures? And then taking this kind of a sketch, like sketching is like such a valuable part of like ID or just even communicating. Like, how can you play around with that graphically? And then, like Sejal was saying, like putting it next to one of your photos, putting it on top of one of your photos to see it like sketch to reality. Then looking at a picture like this, what are we trying to focus on here? Because I can see this picture, but I'm looking like at the plaid pants or like the carpet, but we want the full focus on the insole sock. So if you've already taken a picture and you're like, ooh, like I do think that this might be a little distracting, like changing the image colors that are in it could really help. So how can you isolate that black sock and then make everything like black and white? Or how can you make that sock maybe like a bright blue or something that draws attention to it? And then as we progress, like, I think it's a matter of like the layout of the actual website, but think about how storytelling comes into play with sketch to ideation to first prototype to next prototype, and having it in this kind of linear process where you can see the progression, and then the words, instead of having them kind of like you plopped in, you have them intentionally put in there. So it's like it's adding value, it's suggesting more about the product, but not in a way where I'm like reading maybe like a paper or like something like research. I mean, this is research, but there's like, who is your audience? At the end of the day, it's focusing on who you're sharing this with. Does this person have any understanding of what you're doing? And how can you show them, okay, this is where I got from the beginning to the end. And then let me open this back up to present. Alrighty. So carrying on, it's always helpful to look online at existing products. There's a handful of websites where you can like curate what you really are looking for. So in this context, we have water bottles. Like there's different types of ways and different finishes that impact the impression of a product, or even like different styles that people have. Let's say someone who goes hiking and camping, like buys, say, like Patagonia, like they're going to have a different style than someone who goes to the gym and like, you know, loves lifting weights. There's a visual aesthetic that's more prevalent between the two. And it's like, how do you find, let's say there's someone who's doing a product with a water bottle. How do we implement the water bottle into like a medical setting? Like, can it be sleek? Can it be clean looking? Does it need more like graphic information? Those are things to think about. So how do I take good product process pictures at home with my phone? So you want to make sure that you focus on the subject. So your product only. We don't want to see kind of like background images or background things that might take away from what you're trying to communicate. There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of make your own little like mock-up studio. If you just purchase some like white foam core and then use even like a desk lamp, you know, and then just have that there. And then it just matters on how you're composing the images. You can also, you know, go the full mile and get a like a piece of paper that's a little bit longer. It can be as simple as just, you know, a white background and your product. It's always important to kind of keep consistency. So in these kind of like prototyping phases, how do these show that it was all in one context? So you have a plain background that doesn't take away from your prototypes. this is not what documentation looks like. This might be your reality, but that isn't always necessary to show other people. I guess in your process, we hope to see something that kind of resembles this. Like, how do we bring this prototype to kind of like a functional looking product, something that you could potentially put on the market? There's also like certain tools that we as industrial designers use, and you might not have necessarily all the access to that, but there's different ways that you can kind of alter things to elevate them. And I believe that's all from us today. Any questions?
Great, thank you.
Oops.
I have a question about like making the apparatus like clean. So, for projects like mine is like the gate that's like attached to like a stairwell. So, how would you like suggest, like, since I'm not able to like move it to like a clean, like a aesthetic location, or like put like a background on it, how would you like suggest I like take photos of that in like a nice way?
So like Lauren mentioned, just like playing with the contrast of the image. Like if you have an iPhone, maybe just taking it in portrait mode and blurring the background a little bit. Make sure there's nothing kept on the chair. Make sure when you're taking the picture of that door, there's no one walking behind you, like the background is empty. So just like trying to, because the picture that you will take will be already in context, like somewhat in context. So for your in context picture, you can show your co-designer using it. But for the one that's before, maybe just like blurring out the background a bit, or like making the background like slightly gray tone, but like keeping the product colorful would be like, okay, this is the highlight. This is what the product's about. This is background. So I know like I can differentiate the two things. I know what you designed versus what the background is. Just like blurring out would be a great example, and just like making sure like there's nothing unnecessary kept on the stairs that you don't want to show. Like stairs is not like a bad thing. It's still like a clean background, but just like making sure there aren't shoes on the stairs, or like like things don't add value to your project.
Got it. Thank you.
Also like I think with your gate that opens and closes, like there's specific needs that you wanted, right? So it's like you want your mom to be able to walk, or your co-designer to be able to walk down and open it, but you don't want your dog to be able to like get through it. So like in the context of like a hero shot, a money shot, how do we show your co-designers like feet or shoes like progressing towards the gate, and then like hand on a gate opening, but like dog can't come in, or something like that. And then approaching it as like stairs, and what you're using to take a picture, like it's all geometry. So how can you play around with really clean, straight lines and give a lot of like depth as well?
Thank you.
My product is both like the stand, but more than anything, it's the videos. Should I be taking I should be taking pictures of the stand, but also like how do I really encapsulate the videos and like the money shot and stuff like that?
So I think yours was for your brother, right? Like helping him brush his teeth.
Yeah.
So maybe it can be a picture from the back, like your brother looking in the like video camera, like zoomed into like that stand, but it's only like the back of his head with like a brush in his hand. So you see that your brother's looking at this phone while he's brushing. So it's about what you design. So it's not exactly like a zoomed in picture of the product, but it's like, oh, like what is that? Like what is this about? Like it's almost like an advertisement. But then your focus is on the product. Your brother is just like slight in context. Like maybe like he's covering 1/3 of the frame of the picture, but 2/3 of the frames is like focusing on the stand and like your phone. Like what is he watching?
What's really helpful when like thinking about what your hero shot might look like is literally just sketching it out. Like here's my idea of what I want, and then I'll draw on a piece of paper like a stick person that represents my co-designer, a square that represents the phone on the mirror, and then how like where arms placed, where's the toothbrush. There's like I feel like you have a lot of information that you need to convey. So it's like, okay, like it lives there by itself, but it also a picture of it by itself. It needs to interact with your co-designer, and then also like what's on the screen that they're watching. So you can show kind of like you showing them how to brush their teeth by showing the screen that it's on in a GIF, and then even like putting a fake phone around what your video is, just to kind of show like this is supposed to be on a phone screen is also something you could do. And feel free to ask us for any feedback as we progress and you start taking those photos.
Thank you.
Here's a question maybe for students. If you wanted to highlight things or blur things, do you all have a sense of, is there anyone here who's like, I want to try one of these things, but I don't know what software to use? Okay. Sejal, Lauren, any thoughts on that?
There are multiple platforms, honestly, that you could use if you want to use it just on your phone. Even like downloading apps like Pixar or like these other like phone apps, you can edit your picture on your phone itself instead of like downloading a specific, software on your computer. So based on how proficient, like what exactly are you looking from the picture, it's going to depend on the software. But if you guys have like that portrait mode, that helps already so much, like just blurring out the background. It's just like focusing on the project, like the product itself, and like blurring out the background. But if you want to post edit after taking the picture edited, there are so many apps, and whoever needs it, like we can just send you links on like for the free ones, and you can just edit on like phone or computer. So that shouldn't be like an issue. Like it's not like a new software that you need to learn. Any other questions? Like if you guys have any other questions later on, so specific to your project, like just feel free to reach out to Lauren and I, and like we can just like, give you feedback, or just like maybe help you like come up with interesting compositions, or like just help you with storyboarding, like whatever you want. So for apps, I just saw Sejo's question on the chat. Maybe you and I, and like I and Lauren can talk separately, like whoever's doing a UX project, we didn't think about adding that, but then I've done multiple UX projects. So the hero shot for that is different than like a physical product. So I can like send you an example of that.
I think for like apps that are supposed to be, you're supposed to have interaction on your phone with your co-designer, like having those visuals drawn out, or even a picture of it shown as like someone holding their phone and then being able to see the application is valuable, and showing that process. And then also Sejal is probably more well versed in like kind of displaying the apps, and we can get into that further independently.